Good afternoon. Welcome during the meeting for investors and analysts related to the disclosure of Q1 2019 Tauron Group's financial results. The management board will also present the update of the strategic directions that the company disclosed yesterday after the Warsaw Stock Exchange session. The results will be presented by Mr. Filip Grzegorczyk, the CEO, and Mr. Marek Wadowski, the CFO, whereas during the presentation on the update of the strategic directions, we'll have also Mr. Jarosław Broda, Vice President for Asset Management and Development, and Mr. Kamiński, the Vice President for Corporate Support and Customer. My name is Martin Lauer. I'm working for the Investor Relations team. Let me remind you that our conference is being transmitted over the internet. It is also available in English. And after the presentation, we will be open for questions. We'll have a Q&A session. The questions can also be sent over the internet. Mr. President, please. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, as Mr. Lauer mentioned, today's presentation will be a bit unconventional. First, as a standard, we'll present the Q1 2019 earnings, and afterwards we will present to you our entire management board gathered here with the update of the strategic directions approved yesterday by the supervisory board of our company. Ladies and gentlemen, during the standard part related to the presentation of our earnings, Mr. Marek Wadowski, the CFO, will present the macroeconomic and market situation and will present in details the financial results broken down into individual segments. Okay, let's start. First of all, I'd like to emphasize that in Q1 2019, Tauron Group posted very good financial results that beat the market expectations. And as you can see on this slide, during this quarter, sales revenue went up 15% year-over-year, reaching 5.3 billion PLN. It was due primarily to the higher electricity sales prices. Furthermore, Group's EBITDA came to 1.2 billion PLN and net profit was more than 500 million PLN. In Q1 this year, more than 700 million PLN was spent on CAPEX, including in the distribution segment. We spent more than 350 million PLN on the upgrade of the grid and installing new connections to the grid. The net debt to EBITDA ratio, calculated excluding the debt due to the issued subordinated bonds at the end of the first quarter 2019, came to 2.74. As I already mentioned, the details on debt and financing will be presented later on by the CFO, Mr. Marek Wadowski. Moving on now to the operating data. Tauron Group reported a 1% increase of electricity distribution volume, and the number of customers connected to the grid went up by 66,000. To our distribution grid, we have now in total 5.6 million customers. In Q1, Tauron Group produced 3.82 terawatt-hours of electricity. This 3% lower electricity production volume was a consequence of the adopted production and trading strategy and high volume of generation from the wind sources, from wind generation. Ladies and gentlemen, the highlights of Q1. First of all, among those highlights, it is worth mentioning that we connected to the power grid almost 2,500 renewable energy sources with a total capacity of 35 megawatts. That's more than twice than in the same period of last year. These were micro installations using the photovoltaic technology, wind farms, hydroelectric power plant, also power plant using agricultural biogas. Let me remind you that in April this year, the Fitch Ratings agency affirmed the long-term ratings of Tauron of BBB with a stable outlook. This is a reflection of a good financial condition of our group. Let me hand over now to the CFO. Ladies and gentlemen, in the Q1 2019, the demand for electricity from consumers was 1.4% lower than last year. The electricity imports were higher, almost 13 percentage points. As a result, almost 2 percentage points, the electricity generation in Poland declined. Due to the favorable weather and hydrological conditions during that period, the production from renewable energy sources went up by almost 38%, which led to a situation where the lignite and hard coal-fired generation sources reported a significant drop of output. 10 percentage point in case of lignite and almost 6% in case of hard coal-fired power plants. With respect to the situation of the financial situation in Q1 2019, as the CEO mentioned, we reported higher sales revenue, mainly due to higher electricity sales revenue, which was primarily due to higher electricity sales prices. If the EBITDA were to be adjusted by two one-off events, namely the dissolving of a provision in 2018 in the amount of 230 million PLN related to the employee benefits in the generation line of business, and the consumption of provision for the contracts giving rise to charges in the supply segment, the comparable EBITDA would be 6 percentage points higher than in the same period last year. Looking at our segments in the first quarter, we can see that except for the mining segment, all segments posted positive EBITDA and EBIT. The distribution continues to be the most important segment in terms of contributing to the EBITDA of the entire group. In Q1 2019, the distribution supported the improvement of this result. Other segments, to a lesser small degree, had a negative contribution to the EBITDA, but one should remember that in the generation segment, we are dealing with a one-off event in Q1 2018. In the distribution segment, the main driver that had an impact upon the improvement of the earnings was a lower cost of grid losses, almost 50 million PLN. Because of that, the EBITDA went up. It is worth also remembering that in Q1 2019, the distribution tariff of 2018 was still in force, which meant that the result could have been better had the tariff been in force starting from January 1st. The tariff is in force starting from April 6th. So in the subsequent quarters, we will observe the impact of the higher tariff. The key parameters of the distribution segment have changed a bit. We showed you last time the SAIDI-SAIFI indicators. According to the latest draft of the new quality-based regulations issued by the President of the Energy Regulatory Office, the SAIDI-SAIFI indicators will not be taken into account. The duration of interruption will be taken into account, and the frequency of interruptions. It is worth emphasizing that had we adopted the parameters that currently are in the draft of the new regulation, then it wouldn't have had any negative impact upon our group, which means that in the current shape of the proposed regulatory changes, the distribution segment will continue to be a stable segment. Of course, these regulations might still be changed. Once it is clear what will be the ultimate shape of those regulations, of course, we will present the impact of the new regulations upon the distribution segment. In the generation segment, as I mentioned, an important element is the dissolving in Q1 in the amount of 230 million PLN. With respect to the marginal electricity, we are reporting a growth on the margin in terms of renewable energy. Is obvious on one hand, a larger volume of electricity generated, on the other hand, better market conditions. In terms of marginal electricity from conventional source, it is worth noting, two elements are worth noting. The first element being the use of so-called CERs, so the certificates of emission reduction. The total impact upon the earnings, a positive impact, is 60 million PLN thanks to this operation. And the second important element is the fact that the sales in the generation segment in Q1 was to a large extent had been contracted in 2018, which meant that we were taking advantage of higher market spreads that did occur at that time. In 2019, those spreads are much lower. Therefore, if we were just to operate and sell electricity on the spot market, that result could have been lower. In the supply segment, primarily to say that we consumed the provision of 2018. This is the provision related to the contracts, the agreements giving rise to charges related to the tariff for individual customers in 2019. The tariff for individual customers is at the level of 2018 tariff. Therefore, we will be systematically consuming this provision. With respect to the reduction of margin, you can clearly see here that the reduction of the margin on sales has a material impact upon EBITDA. This is, first of all, a consequence of maintaining flat prices in 2018 versus 2018, as well as the effect of a growing competition in this market, which is a result of rising prices. In terms of property rights, starting from this year, there is no more obligation with respect to the red certificates, violet or yellow certificates, and this leads to improved earnings of the supply segment. In the mining segment, the main driver of earnings is, first of all, the volume of coal output. In this segment, we changed the approach from the accounting point of view to the classification of the headings. Some of the longwall headings are now classified in the books as fixed assets, which means that those headings are being depreciated and they have no direct impact upon EBITDA in the given period. Of course, as the depreciation progresses, the headings also are charged to the cost, but it doesn't have an impact upon EBITDA. And now, it has a positive, in fact, impact upon the level of EBITDA. If we were to have comparability versus the results, the earnings of 2018, this result would have to be increased by 32 million PLN. In terms of debt and financing, at the end of March of 2019, the available financing according to the agreements in place is 4.6 billion PLN. In November, we have a maturity repayment of a domestic market, 1,750 million PLN needs to be repaid. We do not plan to refinance this program. We have funds to repay this program. The net debt to EBITDA ratio is at a safe level. The rating agency affirmed the rating at the up to now level, so the situation in terms of the financing of the company, of our group, is stable. Let me hand over now to the CEO. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. A few words about the work progress on the key projects. It is a common knowledge that our key project today is the construction of a 910 megawatt unit at Jaworzno. The work progress on this unit at the end of Q1 is 90%. Here it is worth reminding you that this unit, although it's hard coal-fired, will be adapted to comply with the restrictive, stringent environmental protection standard. It is worth noting that the emission of CO2 from this unit will be almost 1/3 lower versus the 200 megawatt type units. In case of sulfur oxide and nitrogen oxides, the reduction of emissions will be above 50%. Another important project of Tauron Group is the construction of a CCGT unit at Stalowa Wola. Here, the steam pipings are being installed, auxiliary installations are being mounted, and as well as steel structures. Also, construction works and finishing works are being performed. The work progress at the end of Q1 reached 86%. Ladies and gentlemen, according to on track, we also have upgrade, the refurbishment of the Łagisza power plant, which means adding the heating unit to the 360 megawatt and construction of backup and peaking boilers. The progress on this project reached 22%. The other projects indicated on the slide are being implemented in the mining segment, and they include the construction of 800-meter level at Janina coal mine, construction of a Grzegorz shaft at Sobieski coal mine, as well as the CAPEX program at Brzeszcze coal mine. When we talk about the split of CAPEX by segments, it's worth reminding that the CAPEX in Q1 reached 727 million PLN, and the biggest part of that CAPEX was allocated to the distribution segment, reaching 350 million PLN. The majority of the funds were used to upgrade the grid assets and connect new customers to the grid. CAPEX in the generation segment topped 230 million, including 140 million PLN was spent on the Jaworzno project. And finally, in the mining segment, the CAPEX reached almost 120 million PLN in Q1. It was related to the construction of the Grzegorz shaft at Sobieski coal mine, the CAPEX program at Brzeszcze coal mine, and the construction of a 800-meter level at Janina coal mine. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all in terms of the Q1 earnings of our group. Let us now tell you a few words about the update of the strategic directions of our group. Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday Tauron Group's supervisory board gave a positive opinion, issued a positive opinion on the update of the strategic directions of our group. What is worth mentioning at the very beginning of this presentation, first of all, the strategy of Tauron Group as such is not being subjected to a fundamental change. However, the directions that had not been included in that strategy before, as of yesterday, we may say, are included in the strategy. So we are not dealing with a fundamental change. We are dealing here with an addition, with a supplement to our strategy by adding to it certain new components, elements that have so far not been included in the strategy and have not been the subject of the discussions of business analysis, verifications, or potential verification by the market. What made us do it, ladies and gentlemen? Well, as you remember very well, in 2016, Tauron Group adopted a new strategy at that time, and starting from that, several factors have changed. First of all, we need to indicate, in this respect, the deepening decarbonization and the tightening energy and climate policy of the European Union. In particular, a very strong increase of CO2 emission allowances prices, especially the one that we were dealing with last year. That's one of the reasons for which we decided to work on the update of the strategy. It is true that the carbonization is deepening, the limitation of the curtailment of support systems for conventional energy. Between 2016 and this time now, we have been also dealing with certain regulatory developments, especially a positive for Tauron Group, capacity market development. On the other hand, a negative impact, on the other hand, was caused by the winter package that limits to a certain extent the benefits that we could obtain from the capacity market, in particular the fact the EPS 550 criterion And this criterion eliminates, in fact, over a certain period of time, the possibility of providing support for the hard coal-fired units, generation units. All of that you need to add the issue of financial institutions policies that to a larger and larger, to a growing extent, are departing from providing financing for the entities that hold coal-fired assets and the power generation based on coal. In other words, Tauron is facing clear limitations with respect to acquiring financing for its investment project, the same way as all the other entities with a similar structure of assets. Ladies and gentlemen, you also need to take into account the tightening environmental standards, in particular the so-called BATs, to which we try to adapt the units that will enter the capacity market. Unfortunately, BATs is not the end, and between 2027 and 2030, we expect further tightening of the regulatory environmental standards, which shows a clear direction of the energy transition. Finally, we are also observing a change of behavior among individual customers and business customers. However, this change is even being inspired by the representatives of the government. For instance, this is worth indicating the Energy Plus program that inspires, stimulates consumers or prosumers to be active on the energy market. As a result, we as Tauron Group have to respond to this fast changes, market and regulatory changes, and we have to be in line with the mega trends on the European market, energy market, both in the regulatory as well as in the market environment. It seems, therefore, that the fundamental challenge faced by Tauron is the transition or change of our energy mix towards the renewable energy sources. We would like that starting from today's level of 10% of low and zero emission assets, in 2025 we want to reach 28% level of such assets, and in 2030 66% of total assets being the low and zero emission assets in our energy mix. Ladies and gentlemen, the growth of a group's value must be based on the clean energy development, first of all, the renewable energy sources, as well as the sales of energy-related products and services tailored to customer needs. Tauron undoubtedly will have to be subject itself to transition. Primarily what we mean here is the transition of its energy mix, fuel mix, and here what is the main thing is the fast decommissioning of 220 megawatt units, decommissioning of shutdown of 200 megawatt units after the support systems have expired, and finally the growth in the growth of onshore wind farms, photovoltaic farms, as well as in the future growth and development, and today already the readiness to take part in the offshore wind farms construction projects. Looking at the foundations of Tauron Group's growth, we must admit that today this growth we want to be based on 4 pillars. One is stable distribution segment, growing the low and zero emission sources. Number 3, conventional generation sets receiving support, and these 2 words, receiving support, are the key words. We are talking about conventional assets, yes, provided they get public aid, public support. And the 4th pillar is sales of energy and energy-related products and services tailored to customer needs. So much from me as an introduction. I'd like to ask Mr. Wadowski, the CFO, to continue. We assume that the currently observed increase of CO2 emission allowances prices will continue. This trend will continue. We assume that this growth trend is a permanent trend. This price might not be rising so fast in the subsequent periods. However, we do not assume this to be a passing phenomenon. Therefore, the only option to pay less for CO2 emission allowances will simply to be reduce the emission levels. This reduction of the emission levels is possible thanks to the change of the fuel mix, which was presented 2 slides before. We are assuming that by 2030, the emission levels based on this fuel mix that we presented to you will drop by more than 50%, and the emission levels will drop below 550 kilograms per megawatt hour. That's our these are our assumptions. This is also the result, the effect that we would like to achieve with respect to reducing the cost of purchasing CO2 emission allowances. Ladies and gentlemen, as part of our addition to the strategy, by adding the strategic directions, we are assuming the 3 main priorities. The first one being the transition of the energy mix, including the development of low and zero emission sources. Further details will be presented later on in this presentation. Maintaining the financial stability. This is, first of all, it is worth mentioning that the growth, the development of a zero and low emission power generation is the type of development that requires investment. It requires capex, and capex requires funds. Therefore, made strategic decisions to move towards more green energy and look for partners for certain parts of our conventional power generation business. We want to verify options that we have in this respect, in this area. If the market gives a positive verification of such options, so we find profitable solutions jointly with our partners, then we will be able to allocate the funds saved exactly to grow, to develop low and zero emission power generation. As part of our priorities, we are also assuming optimizing the equity investment portfolio. Ladies and gentlemen, as TAURON Capital Group, having certain substantial debt on our books, we are not able to focus on everything. Therefore, in our update, we selected certain strategic directions that we want to focus on, that we want to grow and expand, and some things require a review and analysis whether this TAURON Capital Group are required, certain equity investments are required. Here, first of all, we consider the possibility, the option of divesting our stake in Stalowa Power Plant and in nuclear nuclear power generation project. Please, Mr. Broda, continue. Now we'd like to discuss our activities in terms of generation line of business. So we are focusing on the evolution of the fuel mix in generation. This is what's changing in our strategy now. We are also not forgetting at the same time that the base of our business is distribution. Capex in distribution beyond 2020 will be going up. We foresee that the role of this segment in our group will be maintained. However, with respect to the main items, the main topics of today's presentation, in the conventional generation line of business, the first option, but an option in the understanding when, will be the decommissioning of 120 megawatt units, that the derogation 700,000 hours based on the accession treaty. The units are still working on those support operational capacity reserve or cold intervention reserve that ensure the profitability, but the depletion of those hours, and those hours will expire, but under derogation they'll be shut down. Those units will be replaced by the Jaworzno unit, but I will explain on that later on. The 200 megawatt units are an example of a steadfast implementation of a strategy adopted in 2016, where we said that we want to shift our generation assets towards more regulated assets. Half of our fleets received 5-year capacity market contracts that, thanks to optimizing the technology, will be able to adapt to BAT the entire fleet of our 200 megawatt units. So by 2025 we have ensured the profitable survival of the 200 megawatt units. The question is, what will happen beyond 2025 is a question what the market will look like, how much renewable energy will be on the market, and what will be the scarcity pricing, market scarcity pricing, and whether staying on the right-hand side of the merit order will be correctly priced from the possibility of the flexibility and the survival of the system. So the decisions on when the 200 megawatt units beyond 2025 will be decommissioned will be made based on the market situation that we'll be analyzing, and as mentioned by the CEO, Mr. Grzegorczyk, the further investments that will be brought about by the further update of BATs after 2027. Probably adapting these units to the new emission standards will be impossible or not profitable. So therefore we face a prospect of a significant departure away from conventional generation units. Further part related to the expansion in the renewable energy sources area. These are two main areas. One, most important for our investors, investments in renewable energy sources are characterized by a higher profitability rate as of today than the ones in conventional energy power generation. This is due to the existing support mechanism system that's been modified. We have feed-in tariff that guarantees, maybe not excellent, but stable financial results of renewable assets. So we have EU goals, both 2020 and 2030, that will stimulate the regulations to exist and ensure the growth of renewables and effective, efficient operation of the ETS. And now in Poland, the renewable sources, wind farms with good load factors, with good wind conditions, are profitable without the support. Therefore, it opens additional opportunities for this segment, both from the point of view of investments of power generation or other investments, PPAs, or cooperation with the largest consumer of electricity. So we perceive this as a growth area. Definitely wind, onshore, and photovoltaics. There are projects available on the market in this area. We're also looking for options to enter the offshore wind farms. This is a big opportunity due to its scale and technical complications. It's not such an easily available product for financial investors as renewable energy sources onshore. We are taking actions in this respect that we already mentioned. We are talking about joining the existing projects, but we also submitted applications to receive licenses for islands to be used for offshore wind farms. And now the model of entering this wind generation, when these goals, ambitions, please look at it more in the rough terms, not in the specific values, whether we go for wind or photovoltaics or some other technology, that will be based on the profitability rate of those products, and this will be based on the regulatory environment and the pace of price declines, technology price declines. The mix that we present today is based on the price relations between the various technologies. The onshore wind generation is the cheapest renewable energy source as of today, and we would like to have between 900 and 1,200 megawatts by 2025 to be built. And the natural question is how we are planning to finance these projects with this debt burden as we have now in our group. Well, we want to cooperate with financial institutions. An example that we have successfully completed is the entrance of financial investors into the Jaworzno project. We started talking to financial investors, not necessarily the same, but we have in Jaworzno with respect to equity level cooperation with partners that we could implement renewable sources. The plan is to build a deconsolidated vehicle that will have its own debt, will be taking on its own debt, will be able to finance those projects on its own, and with the role of investor as an investor and an operator of such assets. I already mentioned the Jaworzno unit that will replace the 120 megawatt units. This is on one hand the issue of improving the efficiency, much higher efficiency, and therefore an improvement of our cost base and the market position. On the other hand, a much lower environmental impact. And the second factor that we, apart from the economic factors, is responsibility. Power generation has always been the responsible business, so for everyone of us to have energy at home, to be able to use a doctor and cook dinner. And now that we realize better our impact upon natural environment, a part of that responsibility of providing energy, electricity, is the issue of emission levels and our impact upon natural environment. So the two factors, profitability of projects and broadly understood responsibility, are the drivers behind the change of our generation mix. Continuing the strategic options presented today and approved yesterday by the supervisory board as a person responsible in the management board for the ownership, oversight and customer, I'd like to present to you those factors that are related to the market verification of the potential for sales, for divestment of certain TAURON assets. On one hand, trends that's been mentioned many times today, trends related to the more and more stringent policy of the European Union, but also from the point of view of certain expectations, social expectations. Well, the renewables direction is beyond any doubt, and therefore our demand for the mining segment will be focused on providing satisfying our needs for those generation units that will continue to be part of our generation fleet, namely Łagisza and New Jaworzno, 910 megawatts, those power plants. Therefore, now we are reviewing the possibility of divesting the Janina coal mine in the context of acquiring financing for the energy transition that is part of our current update of the strategy, but also aimed at improving the financial indicators, ratios, especially in respect to its debt level. We want to improve those ratios. We are considering the option of divesting TAURON Heat and also sale of a stake in the ECSW and sale of a stake in the EJ1 company. All of these options will be subject to a review of an analysis over the next few months. Yesterday, not only those directions were approved by the supervisory board, but also the method of how to divest, how to sell those assets proposed by the management board of the company. Let me emphasize that it will be by way of a competitive tender, but on the other hand, a method aimed at finding partners or strategic investors that will provide for various assets, specific assets mentioned here, and companies, and prospects for further continuation of the operations and also growing the operation, not only in the context of ensuring the stability of employment levels at those units in those entities, but the Janina coal mine for many years will be a significant part of for many years into the future, even if it's owned by another owner due to the need to provide fuel for our generation assets. Also, Tauron Heat in the context of the up-to-now relationship with Tauron. Therefore, we are emphasizing that we will be trying, as part of examining strategic options, we'll be trying to find investors that will be a stable, predictable partner that, in the aspect of business understood this way, will ensure stability or even growth of these entities, taking into account the broadly outlined and currently underway CapEx plan. For instance, at Janina Coal Mine, the entire list of those potential options, disinvestment, divestment options, are part of a large energy transition of Tauron Group. In the context, on one hand, we have those plans that presented by President Broda with respect to acquiring external financing for these targets, but also as part of implementing these strategic options that would involve divestments. The funds obtained will be able to direct to those lines of business, those businesses that will generate a higher rate of return. On the other hand, by unloading some debt burden of Tauron Group, will have a positive impact upon the financial ratio of Tauron Group. Back to the development of services and products that was mentioned by the CEO, that's the continuous trend that we want in the context of a difficult situation on the electricity prices market. We want to emphasize that today, that our customer centricity of Tauron Group, that so far has been focused mainly on the retail customer, that we were setting certain trends in terms of assistance products that, as you're observing the market, were also undertaken by other utility groups, still trying to stay ahead of the curve, ahead of the market, and trying to be in line with those socially beneficial trends we are offering for business customers. We are offering advisory and management services, both with respect to power generation infrastructure, and the first step, including first stop, the energy audit service, and attempting to find solutions to improve energy efficiency. We have a specific list of products that are photovoltaics with respect to installations on customer sites, that is then implemented under the escrow fund, compensation of reactive passive power capacity, electricity consumption management through intelligent smart systems that generate savings in the region of more than a dozen percentage points for such large facilities such as sports arenas. This is a product that is being in demand on the market. On the other hand, the so-called smart city, a large of it so far attention paid to the relationship with the local government units in the context of growing products and services aimed at institutional customers in terms of smart lighting systems, also LED-based lighting systems that allow, under the ESCO formula, for the municipalities to repay the costs of the investment, and reduced after the investment, the capex is repaid, to reduce by almost 2/3 the electricity bills. So we do realize that there are certain inevitable trends on the market visible that we are trying to be in line with. We are trying to respond with, to the, as mentioned by the CEO, Mr. Grzegorczyk, to the more conscious customer that's becoming a real partner, a real participant of market game, and also in the context of individual customers, the pro-consumer attitudes and pro-ecological attitudes that are more and more often utilized by the business side, as far as showing their customers that the goods or services produced or manufactured are based on renewable energy, which is also a specific product in Tauron Group, but for a specific certificate, the customer receives the guarantee that the energy supplied, delivered to the given factory, to the given site, is an energy that's been fully generated from renewable energy sources. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. To sum up, let me put it this way. the addition, a supplement to our up to now strategy by these optional strategic directions is of enormous significance. It is very significant because, as we already mentioned to you, simply the strategy was missing that. Today, we have a mandate from the supervisory board to be able to follow these directions, verify the directions on the market. It is quite an obvious thing for us that both the regulatory environment as well as the market landscape indicates certain, talking about Kant, categorical imperatives. It is so, but there is such an imperative that you need to move towards renewables. We see this as an opportunity, but we also see it as necessity. Conventional generation, of course, today, this is what's dominating at Tauron Group. We want to change this situation, and we have to change it so that, in fact, in 2030, 60% of this mix comes from low and zero-emission assets. And the prospect for the conventional generation is, as a matter of fact, outlined in terms of the timeline by the support system. In terms of mining, we must have much more flexible mining, and this mining primarily, first of all, should be adapted to the future demand of our hard coal-fired units. These are the main trends, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, further expansion of the distribution line of business is also a pillar that we want to continue to be based on. We have an ambition that today's update of a strategy should be used as an impulse for future necessary change of Tauron Group, transformation of Tauron Group. And we do hope that this plan we will be able to successfully implement. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the Management Board for the presentation. Let us move on to the Q&A session, please. Mr. Piotr Dzięciołowski, please. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Dzięciołowski from Citibank. I have several questions. First of all, talking about the list of assets to be divested, whether Janina coal mine is the best coal mine, that's why it was chosen. What's the situation with the other coal mines? And to what extent this cost capitalization increases EBITDA this year in case of ECSW Stalowa? Can you provide, because I was sent by the Management Board of PGNiG to you, are you a commercial operator, trading operator of that power plant? How much this power plant can earn per annum? When will this finally be commissioned? And why you haven't managed to sell the nuclear energy part stake to PGE? That was the concept that was disclosed recently. Let's start with the answer to the third question, because it seems to be the easiest one, because not everyone wanted to sell. But you wanted to sell. Why didn't you sell on your own? Well, because the acquirer, the buyer, wanted to buy the whole thing. That's why, either all or nothing. That's a simple answer. Good. Well, let me answer the first question, why Janina coal mine was selected as an asset for divestment. Generally, the idea behind these update of strategic directions is to focus on certain operations, namely green energy, and to tell ourselves we cannot focus on everything. We assume in the conventional line of business that we want to find a partner for Janina, we want to find a partner for heat, for the heat segment. Why am I speaking about finding a partner? Because first of all, in the case of Janina coal mine, we are dealing with an investment capex in the 800-meter level, and the coal mine has certain prospects, but however, for roughly 2 years more until the 800-meter level is not ready, there will continue to be certain challenges related to the geological and mining conditions cannot be avoided. This investment must be completed, and we want to find such a partner that will make sure that this investment will be completed, this project will be completed. It doesn't mean that if we don't take this decision about verifying this direction, this move, it doesn't mean that we will not be able to complete this investment project on our own. But as I said before, we have certain resources, certain financial capabilities. We are not able to focus on everything. Therefore, we made the decision that we want to verify whether finding a partner for Janina is possible, and whether it's possible to find such a partner on terms that will be satisfactory for both parties and will ensure the coal mine completes the 800-meter level, and at the same time will ensure the contract coal for us. How much money should be added to once this 800-meter level is operating? How much money this coal mine can earn at current coal prices? So how much this coal mine can earn? It's a very good question. Depending, put it this way, I saw various analyses. However, the coal mine is able to have a good positive EBITDA after the 800-meter level is completed, but I don't want to give you specific figures, because one may say that the assumptions made are very much sensitive to various parameters that you make assumptions based on. Janina could be a good, profitable coal mine, but the 800-meter level must be completed. How much it will cost to 800-meter level to be completed? We still need to spend 200 million PLN over the 2-year period. I remember also Brzeszcze coal mine, as you were acquiring 3 years ago. It was at that time one of the worst coal mines requiring a 500 million capex. Has this capex been completed there? But still more money is needed there. There's still more money needed to be spent there. The work progress, I don't remember, we're showing the work progress of the Brzeszcze coal mine is 47%. We still need about 300 million PLN to complete the CAPEX program. It's not one investment project at Brzeszcze, it's an investment program that will mean that this coal mine will have profitability. Ensure that as of today, the situation is such that the Brzeszcze coal mine, some of its coal is selling to the power sector, some coal is sold to the coke industry, so prices are higher there, so the situation is a bit different in that coal mine than in the other coal mine. But in case of the Brzeszcze coal mine, we made the assumption that we will complete this CAPEX program as we are showing here, 2025. So you need to spend 300 million at Janina, 200 million at Sobieski. How much you need to spend? And this business over the last 10 years has an average annual EBITDA of 100 million. Do you really want to have this need 600 million, Sobieski? And are you sure that this gives you a good rate of return on capital employed? As I mentioned, in case of Janina coal mine, why we are talking in general about mining? Because we're talking about mining because looking at this, as a matter of fact, what we are showing to is also a certain package of certain solutions that we want to test. We made the strategic decision that we want to grow more towards, expand more towards green energy, less so towards conventional energy. This is a strategic decision because, for instance, the heat line of business, from my point of view, is not a bad line of business, but we are not able to focus on everything. So this also includes mining. Mining, it also refers to mining. The coal mine, Janina coal mine, is a good coal mine for a partner that would like to grow, to expand in this area, in this line of business, but doesn't just want to sell coal to the power generation, to the municipal facilities. We want to test this direction, whether we are able to find a partner like that. Therefore, if we were to speak about the fact that such a project could be successful, that we find a solution that would be satisfactory for both parties, then those 200 million is something that we wouldn't need to spend, as a matter of fact. But let us remember also about one more thing, that as we look at Tauron future power generation, we have Jaworzno and Łagisza, and this is in total 1.3 gigawatts of installed capacity. These two units need coal, and we would like to have stable fuel base that will also be relatively cheap. So we have to look both from a point of view of both mining and generation. Okay, but what about Stalowa Wola? If you could just say, whether are you able to say how much this power plant will be earning? Let me add, just to add to the statement made by the CFO, Janina is not the best coal mine, but it's the biggest coal mine, and proportion it contributes to, in proportionately to the earnings of the mining line of business. So since it has certain future prospects for this coal mine, so it should have a positive contribution to the earnings. As far as investment projects, each investment project is profitable. The main idea is to reduce the distance to the coal faces and to improve the efficiency of the mining of the coal extraction. In particular, the Grzegorz shaft is the access to low chlorine content coal, which is strategically important, which is very little of that in Poland. There's free coal mines, and complying with the BAT conclusions will require both old and new units will require this type of coal. We will have to import, which will be quite costly, which is not a standard coal, or will be higher cost operating expensive because it's coal that's not fully in line with the requirements, and that's why it is worth completing the Grzegorz shaft, at the same time reducing the long-term exposure to the coal segment and adapting to what will happen after 2025, when we'll be gradually shutting down the old units, and the demand for coal in the group will be reduced, will be decreasing. In terms of Stalowa Wola power plants, let me remind you, a 7-year contract on the capacity market. The emission source about 350 kilograms per megawatt hour, so much below, well below the coal sources. The today's CO2 price is about 27 euro. Improve its profitability and place it in a good position versus coal-fired units, so it will be profitable, definitely. But we do not publish guidance and forecasts, and as a rule, as a principle, can you tell me what could be its load factor? How many hours can operate such a unit in Poland? Well, it depends upon a number of factors. It should somewhere, as of today, once you start to market 2,000 hours, 3,000 around mid-merit. Okay, that's enough for me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please, anyone else would like to have a question? Please, Mr. Grzegorz Witkowski. Good afternoon. I'd like to ask if had this tariff been in place in Q1, distribution earnings would be better by what amount? Distribution segment would make more money. How much more money? The 76 million would be million PLN. That's by how much its distribution segment's EBITDA would have been better in Q1 had that been in place from the beginning. Robert Meyer, IPOPEMA. I'd like to talk about the shutdown, the commissioning of a 120 megawatt unit. According to plan, it were to be decommissioned in 2021. This deadline by 25 is some kind of an overlap, but they will have to be operated longer than according to the original operational plan, grid operational plan. None of those units was supposed to work after 2021 for two reasons. First of all, they will definitely will consume all the derogation hours during that period. Secondly, once the capacity market came into force, the quasi-capacity instruments that PSE, TSO uses, such as Cold Invention Reserve and Operational Capacity Reserve, and based on these systems and support systems, the profitability of those units was based. So whether it's 2021 or the hours will run out in 2020, it will depend upon the level of consumption of the hours, derogation hours. Let me remind you that according to those two support instruments, the profitability of a unit is not dependent upon the number of hours, but upon the availability So there's not a change of strategy, just a certain repetition. And I'd like to also ask about the readiness to participate in the offshore project. How seriously should we treat this? Are you going to look for options to enter this market with Orlen PG into some joint venture, because yourselves you don't have licenses and permits to put up wind farms, windmills on the Baltic Sea? I think we are reviewing all options. The CEO may publicly mention that we are looking for options to enter some existing projects, to be in the first wave of such projects if possible. We also are performing some organic activities. We submitted our own applications for license and we are waiting for a resolution. And in what area did you apply for those licenses? In the Baltic Sea, but which fields in detail? This is confidential information, and you can find it in the license application. Thank you. And one more question about information. ČEZ will be trying to sell the power plant Elcho, Chorzów and Skawina. Are you interested in such a process? We, I think, showed the directions here of our expansion, and I think this should be enough as far as our answer to this question is concerned. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. We have let us give a chance for investors that ask questions over the internet, and there's a few questions coming from internet. Let's start with this one. What about a relatively young unit, Łagisza B10? It has support until 2021. Question about the 2025. What will happen after 25? What is the outlook? Will only Jaworzno B7 unit left? Another question about the expected date of the resolution of the issue of buying 200 megawatts from Inventus, and the question directly to President Broda. Vice President Broda, please give the current cost of the technology in millions PLN per megawatt, onshore, offshore photovoltaics. And maybe one more as a full package, to make it a full package. Are you convinced that Poland has sufficiently stable regulatory environment in terms of expanding offshore wind farms, developing offshore wind farms? Answering the first question, as you can see on this slide here, Łagisza 460 is not to be decommissioned. It's an efficient unit with good efficiency and systematically improved dispatchability, availability, and long-term. This is a long-term part of our portfolio. In terms of the cost of the technology, of course, they differ, especially the cost of offshore technology, which depends upon the depth, but roughly 10-12 million PLN, of onshore about 6, and photovoltaics roughly 3 million. That's the cost of but those prices keep changing quite quickly, especially in the photovoltaics, and I'd like to refer you to the compilations available on the market, because we are not really an authority to give you precise details on the cost of technology. As Inventus, jointly with Mr. Wadowski, will answer that the process underway. Will be keeping you up to date about its progress as soon as new information comes up. The final question, whether we are convinced about the stable regulatory environment in terms of offshore. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are presenting here is the result of our thinking, of the decisions on focusing on certain areas in terms of offshore. We are speaking very clearly, a readiness to take part in the projects to construct offshore wind farms. Each of these activities will be subjected to a review in terms of its profitability. Of course, if it turns out out that this activity is not profitable, when taking into account, for instance, the regulations, then probably will not be the direction that we'll be taking. Today we want to be ready for that, we are interested in that, and we hope that we are able to find a profitable and financially feasible solution. Thank you very much. Mr. Piotr Dzięciołowski, please. Thank you very much for the opportunity to answer more questions. I took advantage of the fact that my colleagues are not willing to ask questions. I'd like to ask why you have selected assets with a relatively low value, since the group needs capital. Why didn't you think about letting someone in with a good shareholders agreement into the distribution segment? It's not the cash flow business. Cash flow is negative or roughly close to zero. It's a way to obtain significant funds to move in the direction that you want to follow, but because from the sale of nuclear energy product, in my humble opinion, you will not get too much money. The first question. Second question, if you could define this process of restructuring, because it seems to me that you said something like that, but in 2025 there's a chance that we'll have just 2 new generation units left that employ 300, 500 people. How many people now you have in the workforce of the generation segment? Which units can be shut down and when? How will this process go over the next 5 years? Not a long period. I'm talking about Łaziska, Siersza. These are all 100, 200 megawatt units, and how organization technically and financially over the next 5 years are you planning to implement it? And maybe such directional mention about what does it mean for EBITDA, for the debt, for the production, for securing your portfolio. You're showing the strategy. I had to ask more difficult questions here. And a question to Mr. Wadowski, the CFO, because in the previous round I asked a question about the impact of capitalization of costs in the mining, and what amount was it? That's just a detail that I wanted to get, if I may. Okay, the first question, distribution. Well, why not the distribution? Well, ladies and gentlemen, here by presenting the strategic directions, we made certain assumptions. In the distribution line of business, we are assuming that this is a subsidiary that is generating the largest part of our EBITDA. It's a regulated segment, and I will not be disclosing any secrets here, but both the rating agency as well as the financial institutions pay attention to that. What percentage of EBITDA comes from the regulated line of business? Case of European Investment Bank, this level for preferential terms financing is at least 50%. Therefore, our goal is to have this revenue from regulated area to be high, because it ensures the stability of our source of financing. That's why we did not talk about the distribution. If we were to let a partner in, then some part of EBITDA will be booked on the partner's books. I realize that in case of selling EJ1, the revenue, the proceeds from the sale might not be very high. It's not so much to get the proceeds from the sale, it's just a different issue, more of a strategic decision that we are not entering the nuclear power generation. We are focusing on a different area because, as a matter of fact, we'll get some money, the proceeds are important, but what's more important, that we will not be spending any more money on nuclear projects. This could be ultimately a higher amount. So this is a more important element of the decision. In terms of restructuring, here I'd like to say the following. As Jarek mentioned before, the 120 and 200 megawatt units, first of all, let us remember about one thing, that those units currently are used by the operator. They are needed in the system, maybe not daily, but They are being used, and we will be looking here, first of all, at the profitability of such units. As of today, we have the following situation, that the capacity market ensures for those units the operation at least until the end of 2025. If it turns out that the further operation is impossible, of course, we will be talking about that also to the TSO, to the operator. The continuation of such operation of such units will be impossible. Well, undoubtedly, we will be approaching the analysis how to restructure generation line of business. As of today, we haven't developed such a concept yet because for now we are talking about testing the strategic directions. If it turned out that those units will be needed in the system, will be profitable, so we cannot exclude that they will continue operating, but also on the condition that they are profitable or even generating positive cash flow generation. So until 2025, you don't want to shut down any sites. Not even shutting down 120 megawatt units will not lead to a substantial reduction of costs. We're not planning to shut down because at all sites we have units that won contracts on the capacity market. Preparing and evaluating the profitability of the products, we took into account the entire cost of the site, including what will be left after the 120 megawatt units shut down. As far as 120 megawatt units, the workforces are already very much limited, and because they are just a reserve in the system, and they operate on the interventional basis. So after the shutdown, the people that are working there now will be employed by the group, so will not have any positive or negative impact. So there will be no large severance payments or major reductions. Of course, after 200 megawatt units are decommissioned, we have the issue of people, of workforce, but we don't know as of today when will the decommissioning shutdown will take place. The last figure about the capitalization of costs in the mining, can you say per annum how much now, at what will be the EBITDA versus capex in the mining segment? Unfortunately, I must say that we are not publishing this type of forecasts. It's difficult for me to give you any details, but the effect of the capitalization year over year is not a forecast, it's just a change of the accounting classification on the books. Or you don't want to say that I'll have an estimate of cash flow in the mining segment. We are assuming the following, that over the next 2 years, the mining will have a financial result in the order around zero, slightly below. I'm talking about EBITDA. However, after that period, there is a chance that the result will be better, but definitely it will not be quick, it will not be soon. Thank you very much. One more thing I'd like to add about distribution. Of course, this is probably the easiest asset to divest, therefore it's not the best one for us to divest, because we look at the ROIs of our businesses that you can find from the financial statements. This shows that we don't want to get rid of the one that generates the best profitability. Well, what returns are you expecting in green energy, and what today, which is the regulated business, what rate of return do you have on regulatory asset base in the distribution segment, just to compare apples to apples? Because it seems that there is some recycling of assets when you move from 6-8% rate of return to something that gives you double-digit rate of return. That would be positive, and as a matter of fact, I would disagree with a statement that would have to lead to the consolidation of EBITDA, but I was talking about 49%. This is quite a proven mechanism, but that's just my opinion. The other, that's true. However, the other assets feature lower rates of returns than distribution. That's why the first in line. Ladies and gentlemen, our speakers will be at yours. Mr. Robert, the last question, please. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask about the supply segment, because you consumed 51 million PLN of a provision related to the agreements giving rise to charges. Is it just the G Group? If so, in Q1 year over year, the sales went up from volume went up from 261 to 269 terawatt hours in the G group. So how can you explain that? And looking at the sales groups, the other value, Group A, declined. Are there some shifts in agreements that gave rise to losses in those two groups? And the question about prices, whether those prices can be said that you were selling at market prices and outside the G tariff. Well, the provision was set up related to the loss only in the G group. The consumption, the dissolving of this provision is applicable only to the G group. That's true, but the retail electricity supply in the G group went up. This is what was caused by generally by the increase of demand in that group. I mentioned that in total, in the national power system, the demand for electricity declined, but it's spread differently in different groups. For instance, in our distribution area, the G group is going up, whereas the group of small, very small, sometimes medium-sized enterprises. In this group, we are seeing declines. In the A group, we are facing such a situation where these are frequently contracts with very low margins. Therefore, here in this group, taking into account the situation on the electricity market, there are cases when such sales are not profitable anymore. So therefore, this is the decline in the A group. This is the reason for the decline in group. EA group. So far, but 140 million provision, we deduct 51, and this year estimation for the subsequent quarters, what will be the loss in the G tariff segment, whereas the other tariffs prices are, let's say, market prices. And until there is an ordinance, the regulation from the Energy Regulatory Office, this provision will not change. The other tariffs are market-based. It is worth indicate something that is worth differentiating. This is the provision related to losses, whereas the decline of margins is occurring in the other groups. What we can see on the second bar from the left-hand side, electricity volume, sales and volume. You can see the decline of the margin there, whereas the dissolving of the provision is applicable to the loss. The provision compensates, offsets the loss, but doesn't offset the loss of margin. You can see it on the second bar from the left-hand side. As of today, there is no ordinance, there's no regulation. The law says that the obligation to adapt the prices to the 2018 level is in force until the 30th day after the regulation comes into force. This regulation is not in force, so we are applying prices that are in line with the law, but not taking into account the potential entry into force of the ordinance, of the regulation. If it comes into force, then we will adapt our prices accordingly. Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, for such a large number of visitors and so many questions. Our speakers will be at your service, will be ready to talk to you after the presentation. I'd like to invite you also today after we present the first half results in August. Thank you very much and see you next time.